friends, and welcome back to my channel where we mainly discuss thrillers on Thursdays, and it is the final Thursday of the month, which means it's Year of Horror Book Club Day, as I like to call it. If you don't know what the Year of Horror Book Club is, I'll have more information and also the Discord discussion link where you can discuss the books as you read them. But more or less, we're either reading one horror novel or one book that's about a horrifying topic. So it's all just kind of about reading disturbing books in general and reading the most disturbing books of all time. These videos always have the same structure. First, we'll go through book club updates and announce the new book. Then we'll get into a non-spoiler review of this month's book, which was In the Miso Soup, and then we will get into a spoiler-filled discussion, and I'll have timestamps down below as always. In last month's video, I already announced what the May book will be, and that is The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule. This was published back in the 80s, and since everybody's talking about Ted Bundy right now, this is a non-fiction novel written by a woman who was friends with Ted Bundy and also trying to investigate who the killer was, not knowing that she was friends with him, so it sounds really fascinating. I'll also point out that with The Stranger Beside Me, I believe it's free on Kindle Unlimited if you have that, or if you do a free trial and cancel it, like I probably will. And we're gonna have a bit of a change to the Year of Horror Book Club, and if you're part of the Discord group and you've been following it for the past week, or maybe my Twitter, you will already know what I'm about to say. But for the first 5 months of the Year of Horror Book Club, I've been picking out the books. Kind of. I say I've been picking them out, but really I've been mainly choosing between books that you all recommended months and months ago. I had asked you guys on YouTube and Twitter what the most disturbing books of all time you've read were, and I've been picking books that you all said you thought were really disturbing. But I have kind of a long list, and it's honestly just been stressing me out a little bit trying to choose. So I thought a good way to go about the rest of the Year of Horror Book Club months would be for me to pick 3 of those books that I've either heard you guys recommend, mention maybe in passing you're interested, or maybe it's on one of like the most disturbing books of all time lists. Post 3 of those a month, and then you guys can vote. So I announced on Twitter and the Discord group what the poll for this month was, and the 3 books were The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. It's supposed to be an incredibly disturbing book about a girl who's kidnapped. There was The Hunger, which is supposed to do with like the Donner Party and witchcraft, which I thought was an interesting combination. And then the final one was The Devil in the White City, which is about H.H. Holmes. If you've seen American Horror Story Hotel, that's what it makes me think of. But so this poll could not have been more close. I did kind of anticipate that it would be between The Girl Next Door and The Devil in the White City, just because those 2 books are more popular than The Hunger, so I had a feeling it was going to be between those, but I didn't anticipate how close it would be. I was following it, and The Devil in the White City won by literally 1 vote. It was kind of going back and forth between the 2, so it was really exciting watching that happen. And just because The Girl Next Door lost by 1 vote doesn't mean we're not going to read it. I'm definitely still going to carry over whatever the second most voted on book was over to the next month and include that in that month's poll, so it has another chance. And whenever I post the Twitter poll, I'm always going to reply to it with links to each of those books on Goodreads, because my only fear with doing a poll, and this is, I will say, I partially do survey design as my job, so this is how my brain works. My only fear with doing a poll is that it's always just going to be whatever book people have heard of is going to win, and underrated reads or maybe hidden gems people haven't heard of are never going to win. So I will always link to the Goodreads page of each, just so if you haven't heard of all books before you vote, you can go ahead and click on each and have an idea about all 3 before you vote. Whew, okay, that was a longer intro than normal, but the rest of this video will be quick since In the Miso Soup was so quick. So getting into a spoiler-free discussion of In the Miso Soup, as you can tell, this was not a book that I read at my desk at work. So In the Miso Soup was published in 2006, I believe it is, by Ryu Murakami. He's an incredibly popular Japanese horror novelist. This takes place in Tokyo. I'm glancing over at my notes so I make sure to remember to say everything. Kenji is our protagonist. I believe he's 20 years old, and he shows tourists around Tokyo's red light district, which is called Kabukicho. So he takes them on kind of a sex tourist excursion, and recently a woman has been chopped up and thrown in a trash can. So the city's a little bit on edge, and Kenji meets Frank, and Frank is a very strange overweight American tourist who wants to see the whole red light district, just wants to have sex really bad. And little things start happening where Kenji starts to believe that Frank may be the killer. So it's partially a horror novel, partially kind of a mystery. We're getting into this spoiler-free review, first with pros, then with cons. In terms of pros, I liked how the level of, I don't know how to describe this, the level of gore, the level of how creepy this book was really built up over time. There's something very unsettling about Frank, how he has this skin that's described as having no pores and just kind of be almost looking like a mask. I think someone said that they pictured Kevin from The Office while they were reading this, which I find really funny. But kind of things that were subtly eerie like that would happen, and then I won't say what, but something is stuck to Kenji's door that's very creepy, and then murder starts to happen throughout the book, and it really escalates quite quickly. And so that part of it I thought was really well done. And I read a lot of disturbing books, but there were scenes in this, and you'll know which scene I'm talking about, that really turned my stomach. And you know, this whole series and Year of Horror Book Club is about reading disturbing books, and I will say that, you know, a pro, even though it's strange to call it a pro, is the fact that this book really did get under my skin, turn my stomach, and really disturb me. Another aspect I really enjoyed was learning about Japanese culture. Granted, I'm curious if anyone from this video happens to be from Japan. I've visited before, but I was only there for a week. I'm curious how accurate some of the stuff, and especially the cultural aspects, if they're accurate or not, but I found it really fascinating, especially Kenji's view of Americans in general. I actually feel like I learned a little bit about the world, so I enjoyed that, which is strange to say about a book like this, but I did. And I also just really liked Kenji as a character, which he's not an incredibly empathetic person. He's not an incredibly normal protagonist, but I think what I liked about him is he was just very different from any other protagonist that I've read. I feel like whenever I'm reading a mystery or horror novel, the protagonist is always like the slightly older, kind of sarcastic, jaded person who hates the world, but, you know, solves everything in the end. And Kenji is just very different and actually felt really realistic to me. So I really liked him as a narrator. In terms of cons, and it's hard to say any of this without spoiling it, but I won't, I really had trouble with the pacing because the most horrifying part of this book happens, I believe it's smack dab in the middle. I forget exactly what page, but then the book starts to, the pace just kind of plummets, and there are scenes where Frank's going on a monologue. Excuse me. See, I even started yawning just thinking about it, and I'll admit there were a few pages that I skimmed where Frank was just talking and there wasn't even a break in the paragraph and I saw no end in sight. Even though this was not a con for me, I'll include this here since it's from what I've seen in reviews, people's main criticism of the book, and that's the ending. Again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but it's quite just, it's not a like very definitive ending where everything you're gonna picture happens, but I kind of like that because I feel like Murakami's point with this book was to make you think and for it to not have a stereotypical ending. So I can 100% understand why people didn't find the ending very satisfying, but personally, I kind of liked it and I kind of can't stop thinking about this book. So in the end, it was very disturbing, but I had some issues with the pacing, so I will give In the Miso Soup by Ryu Murakami 3.5 out of 5 creepy branches. So now getting into spoilers. Immediately, I just want to talk about the ear and the vagina. No, I mean, there's nothing, I mean, what can you even say about that? But the scenes when he's slicing people open and it's talking about what the blood looks like as it flows out of them really turned my stomach. And again, I'm curious for you guys if you found it disturbing or not, because I realized that although I read a lot of thrillers and horror novels, I don't read a lot of really gory books. A lot of the books I read, the gore is kind of skimmed over, and in my mind I always thought, oh well, that makes it more terrifying because my mind is going to immediately think of the worst thing possible. But this book kind of made me realize that maybe that's not the case, and when things are described in detail, sometimes it is much more horrifying. And for some reason, the aspect that sticks out to me most is the piece of skin stuck to Kenji's door. And I think the reason it made me so viscerally uncomfortable is because we've all seen horror movies where people are stabbed and shot and things like that, but I've personally never heard or even thought of a piece of a dead person's skin stuck to a door. That's not something my mind would ever think of or imagine, and so I think that's why it kind of was so disquieting to me. I also want to talk a little bit about the ending. It was interesting because I saw a lot of people in the Discord group, and I guess I could kind of get this, who thought it was going to have some kind of supernatural ending. I never really thought that, and again, I like the fact that even though the ending's not open-ended, because again, it's not like you didn't find out who the killer was. The fact that Kenji just walks away, I can see why it bothers people, but at the same time, I didn't mind that he wasn't kind of your stereotypical hero who is immediately gonna rush off and maybe sacrifice himself to try and kill Frank or something like that. It was a different take on how someone might view someone like this, and especially how Kenji viewed the people that Frank killed, where in some instances, he almost kind of looked down on them and, you know, why didn't they fight back? And then in other instances, he's really kind of comparing himself to them and sees a lot of himself in them. So I just found Kenji's reactions to that whole murder scene really strange and interesting. So those were all of my thoughts on In the Miso Soup by Ryu Murakami. Definitely a strange, disturbing little book. I don't think it would have been one that I would have naturally picked up, but that's what I kind of like about this book club, is that we're reading things that maybe sometimes we wouldn't have always just picked up ourselves. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm gonna go download a free trial of Kindle Unlimited to get my hands on The Stranger Beside Me, and I'll see you guys next Thursday. Bye.